On today's Transport Evolved, we look back to 2014. We ask if Tesla is unveiling things just to put off its detractors. We look at the science behind climate and emissions and all of that, and we look forward to 2015. These stories and more coming up next on Transport Evolved. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to episode number 223 of Transport Evolved, recorded on Sunday, December 28th, 2014. Yes, the last show of 2014. My name is Nikki Gordon-Bloomfield, and I'm your usual host into the world of future transport. Cleaner, greener, cleaner, greener, smarter and safer. That's our motto. Obviously, I've had too much in the way of Christmas beverages. I promise you, I am completely sober right now, and somebody who's joining us on the show today who will no doubt use that as a springboard on which to make some fun quip, the fantastic Chelsea Sexton, Who Killed the Electric Car and Others. Revenge of the Electric Car poster in the background. Chelsea, I've not seen that one before. How are you?
Yes, there is. If I were any better, there would be two of me.
Well, you know what? There is a subset of plug-in vehicle fans who I'm sure would find that fantastic. How are you? How the devil are you? You've had a really wet, horrible time in LA of late, which is unusual.
It has been remarkably damp around here, which it's sort of needed. We have had a little bit of rain, which is nothing for anyone else anywhere else in the country, but for us it's been a little bit chaotic, and we're wishing for more of it. We've
had lots of rain, and we've had a little bit of cold, and that's it. And in fact, the UK weather has been so terrible. We've had this much snow, and everyone stopped driving. I mean, we haven't had any snow at all in Bristol, but further north, they've had 1 centimetre of snow, and they've cancelled entire train services and bus services, and the freeways have ground to a halt. And a gentleman
Sounds
who's
like
joining
Atlanta.
Yeah, there's a gentleman joining us today who will not find that in any way, shape or form amusing, because he's used to snow on so many levels being in Minnesota. Please welcome to the show Chris Tessum, who's here to talk about a study from the University of Minnesota about emissions and carbon footprints and air quality, etc., etc. Welcome to the show today, Chris.
Hi. Good to be here.
Well, thank you for sticking around as we set the show up today. As I was saying to Chelsea and Chris at the beginning of the show, we're a little behind today. Normally, we start setting the show up at 9 o'clock in the morning, between 7 and 9 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday, and all the set and everything else is built by about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Today, I was building the set 45 minutes ago, so that kind of it's Christmas. We'll let it off. Now, we're going to talk with Chris in a minute about some of the interesting things he's been doing before the study that we're talking about today. But we are, first of all, Chelsea, going to talk to you about your culinary habits, because I saw a photograph on Facebook. Well, the reason why I'm going to talk about this, Chelsea, is because people think of you as an electric car advocate and teller of truths, known for your candour, but you have a whole other side that people don't normally talk about. You are an amazing cook. I have it on good authority. And you've been making your own sweets this Christmas. Tell us about them.
Well, I have a tiny little family, and so we don't go in for many of the traditional holiday sort of Christmassy things, but there are always adventures with the boy, and there have been some horse head pictures on Facebook, and I always manage to do some baking or treat making or something, since I am sort of compulsive about those things. So it's been actually until very recently a little too warm to do very much of it. But yes, I did manage to make one lonely little batch of caramels and put pictures on Facebook for people that, suspect I have no other side besides cars.
Yes. And the horse head does make me question the boy. The boy and the horse head. Chelsea's son, for those who don't know. It's always very interesting on your Facebook page. That's all I'm going to say. Wandering around LA doing weird things. Chris, by complete contrast. You've done some really interesting things that I wouldn't necessarily piece together as being something that would lead to a career in environmental sciences or engineering. Maybe the engineering. So you started off, you were an intern at Volvo in Gothenburg, Sweden, and you helped with their air tunnels, right?
Yeah, I did that for a little while.
So tell us about that. Oh, he's vanished. I don't know if his connection's gone. That would be rather sad, wouldn't it, Chelsea, if we lost Chris, just we were asking him about his wind tunnels and all sorts of other things. All right.
It would be par for the course when I'm on the show.
It would be par for the course. I'm going to try and get him back. And you can tell us a little bit more about what's been going on in LA lately in the world of alternative fuel vehicles. Tell us about that.
Not a tremendous amount. It's actually been a little too quiet, although I have high hopes that it will pick up in January as CES gets going in Detroit, and sort of the season continues to roll on, and I have big expectations for automaker news. So.
Excellent. It's actually quite fun because we were looking back at some of the things that we've got to do, things that have been promised to us this year, and we're going to be reviewing that at the end of the show today. And there are some things that were being talked about coming up for the auto show season that I don't think are going to happen. So that's very interesting. Chris, are you back with us? Oh, not sure if he's there. Chris, are you there? He's very, very quiet. I don't know if he can hear us. What I'm going to do is I'm not convinced that this is not a problem with my end. So what I will do is I will restart the application while we have a little bit of a break. All right, so we are going to be talking today, Chelsea, about 2014 and some of the fun things that we got up to in 2014. What is your highlight of 2014?
I think probably that BMW, at least for now, is looking like it's kind of come online with the i3. So from my perspective, our biggest challenge has been, and actually still unfortunately remains, lack of product.
Right.
And as long as that remains true, we can kind of only get so far, no matter how good the cars are, no matter what Tesla does, all of this other stuff. So at least, especially as we have the Leaf and the Volt kind of getting a little long in the tooth right now, we have the i3 that's coming online. And so far, they've been doing decently at it.
Yep.
This is BMW's third EV program. So to some degree, there is absolutely no excuse for them not to execute this well. Mm-hmm. And yet we know from experience that doesn't necessarily mean a lot. So they've got around 10,000 cars on the road so far, which is a pretty respectable amount, or 12,000, I think. So we'll see how that continues and who else joins that little party. I think certainly the next couple of years are the years of the Germans, based on both carb regulations and their announcements. So it will be sort of fish or cut bait for that little country.
It's going to be an interesting one. Chris, if you're watching the stream, we are trying desperately to call you back. And at the moment, we are struggling a little bit. So let's hope that we can bring him back any second now. This happens occasionally. As Chelsea said, it happens when she's on the show. We're going to blame you, Chelsea.
It's okay. I bring good weather and bad connections.
Good weather and bad connections. The funny thing is, Chelsea, that your connection is, I think, probably one of the best connections we've had between you and I for goodness knows how long. And, you've got lovely HD quality video and everything is working perfectly and everyone is happy. I think that's a new one for us, actually, because normally things go a little bit pear-shaped and Pete-tong, as they say, but it's all working today. It's all working today, which is good. It's a good start. All right, so I'm now trying to shuffle everything, you see, to try and get everything running. This is a good point, though, in the show to talk about the Tesla battery swap. Now, it happened a few days before Christmas, Chelsea. There was an announcement from Elon Musk about the battery swapping. It was going to go live. This battery swap station was going to go live before the end of the year. And unfortunately, some of the things that we were talking about for battery swapping are not actually what we're seeing in reality. So initially, Elon Musk was talking about having this this battery swap facility. Anyone could rock up and take part. Any Tesla owner could take part. But there seems to be now a problem. This is a beta project, very much a beta project, one location, and you have to be invited to take part. Can you explain what's going on here? And an announcement just before Christmas.
Well, the timing is not terribly surprising. Over the last couple of years, battery swapping has been allowed into CARB, the Air Resources Board's definition of fast fueling for EVs, which says that you must, or hydrogen, which says you must be able to refuel your vehicle 95% within 10 minutes, and if you do, you get extra CARB credits. And who doesn't like that? Since there's kind of a whole market around CARB credits, and Tesla's made quite a bit of revenue that way. So Tesla decided years ago, actually, before anyone really knew it, that they were interested in this notion of swapping, although it was meant to be very private. Like, you could take your car to the store and swap for a larger pack just to go on vacation, and the store would keep your battery and then give it back at the end. And I mean, logistically, it would have been an absolute nightmare, but that was sort of how it started until the pieces started coming together of, oh, we could get CARB credit for this, and implemented it that way. So the announcements have always been timed to the various CARB meetings. And around a year ago, the board kind of got a little miffed at the idea that Tesla's been getting extra credits all this time for all these cars, and there has actually been not a single swap going on ever, and decided they were going to remove that category from the credits. And lo and behold, Elon comes out and says, oh no, we are going to have a public swapping station, and we'll have it by the end of the year. And of course, he had to meet that deadline. So CARB's been on the fence of getting rid of this extra credit, and Tesla's been trying to push to keep it. Whatever other business benefits they might actually believe in, and I think they're pretty light, this has absolutely been aimed at the CARB situation.
I thought
and it
they
also
changed
explains
that,
why there's
though.
one, why it's in California.
I thought they changed that, though.
They were supposed to vote on it at the October meeting, and that was one of the several decisions they did not make.
And that's such a shame. That's such a shame to see. I just don't see it. I just don't see it happening, to be honest. We do have a real problem with Chris, and I don't know what it is. I think it's a studio side thing. So hang tight. We are going to try and reboot the problematic machine, and then we'll call Chris right back. I do apologise if you're watching the stream and you're watching Chelsea's video, and occasionally you see a call coming in on Skype. Obviously, that's Chris trying to reconnect. It happens sometimes with old, ancient computer technology. What can I say? Let's carry on, Chelsea. Let's talk about some of the other things that have been going on. We're going to have basically a bit of a shuffle in the show today to try and move things around a bit. So one of the things, Chelsea, that I'm a bit unsure of whilst talking about the battery swap with Tesla is that Tesla itself doesn't seem convinced. How do you view that?
Well, look, there's a reason that battery swapping has been raised and dismissed umpteen times in the last 20 years, long before guys like Shai Agassi or Elon ever started thinking about electric cars. This is not a new idea. And it's always been a problematic one for a variety of reasons, capital being only one of them. But at this stage of the game, right, and given other refueling options, the appetite for swapping, it's neat for hype.
Right,
it's kind of like wireless charging. The hype to usefulness ratio on swapping is really high. Mm-hmm. So it sounds like a fantastic idea in theory, but it completely misunderstands how EV drivers use EVs in the first place.
Right. It does, and there's this argument going on at the moment in which people are saying, these electric cars. I'd only have one if I could do 400 miles between points, and I have to say there is a bit of me that says that is very irresponsible. There is no way that you can safely drive from one point to another 400 miles and carry on. 200 miles is your stop point as far as I'm concerned, and that's the point where you need to have a break, you need to stop, and you need to carry on. Chris, you're back. Can you hear me now? He can. Yes, he's back, and unfortunately the audio is coming through on the wrong one. So Chelsea, Where were we? I'm just going to try one final time to try and sort Chris out. I think it's a problem with my end, so do hang with me, Chris. I think we're pretty close to fixing the problem on this. Stay on the line, and we will figure this out. Don't worry. Okay. Chelsea.
Yes.
Other thing we're going to talk about regarding Tesla is the 200 or the 400 mile Roadster battery pack upgrade, which again announced on Christmas Day. I was so angry about that because it's like, come on, Elon Musk, give journalists a day off.
Why would he do that when he can commandeer the news cycle?
Well, I refused to cover it, and somebody else covered it actually. So tell us about that. What's your view on this? This is a niche market product.
Well, yeah, but I don't think it's about a niche market thing. So the announcement in a nutshell is that there are pending a few upgrades to the Roadster, in particular new batteries that will allow it to go, in theory, up to 400 miles, although, you know, there's always EV range math. Some have called it Musk math, but it applies to all EVs. So we'll take the 400 miles with a grain of salt, but the whole point is newer batteries, potentially longer range, and really this is a customer service play for the super early adopter core customer loyalists of Tesla. So whether or not he actually sells very many of these, it is a bold move from that perspective, because the traditional industry model is we sell a car, you go away till you come back to buy another car, not you keep upgrading a car that's already several years old.
Yeah, and sorry to jump in there. There's one thing that I don't get about this. And Chris, can I just make sure that you are here and you can hear us now?
I'm here.
Fantastic. We still can't get. We're still going to try and get your audio through. But the thing I don't get you on Chelsea, and the thing I don't get about this whole situation is that the Tesla Roadster is essentially a Lotus, and Lotus wasn't known for its longevity, was it?
Lotus wasn't known for a lot of things, even with respect to Tesla.
So my point is, who would want to keep a Lotus running for that long?
Well, but to think of it as keeping a Lotus running, this is who these people are. To them, it is not keeping a Lotus running. It is keeping their Tesla. And this particular group of people took the earliest chance, paid the most for what was an incredibly hand-built car with all of the fun, but also all of the quirks that come with such a thing, and have been the loyalists ever since. So some of them have stepped up to the Model S, and some have ordered the Model X, and some are getting a whole garage full of Teslas. Right. But they have also watched all of these upgrades come to Model S, and all of this customer service support to Model S, and superchargers for Model S, and then they've kind of been left out in the cold. So for a long time, they have been asking Tesla, toss us a bone, not even for free, but just don't forget that we're still here. We still love our cars. And in particular, EVs don't get recycled and don't wear out and replaced as quickly as internal combustion should. But
is this sorry to interrupt again, Chelsea, is this like the early RAV4 EV owners who just who don't want to get rid of their cars?
Well, I mean, the difference with the first RAV4 folks is they quite literally had nothing else to jump to. So that was a huge part of why they wanted to keep those cars going, because there literally was nothing until the Leaf, which came, a good 10 years later. Right. So, this is slightly different, but it is definitely evidence of, and it's not new to any of us, just how much EV drivers love their EVs. And in particular, how much they love the companies that they perceive are supporting them in return. I mean, this is the core issue for all companies that want to play with plug-in cars. It is not about the cars. All of the cars have been good cars. Even the compliance cars are fundamentally good cars. There's not a lemon in the bunch, really. We all have our subjective, I like this one better than that one. But there's very few that you look at and you go, oh, I'm so sorry you got that car. But the experience around it ends up meaning everything. I mean, it is very much like early Saturn days. The cars are fine, but fundamentally they're all fine. It's all about what is the experience of buying and owning an electric car. And that is where just in the last couple of years, actually, Tesla has really done a pivot and started to set itself apart. And it's easy enough to say, well, yeah, that's a $100,000 car, of course. And yes, of course, at that price, it should be that kind of an experience. But it is also an opportunity for every other player
Yeah,
to capitalize on that.
Chris, we're going to try one more time. You should be able to hear me, and I should be able to hear you.
I can hear you.
Yes! Yes! Okay, this is what happens when we use 6-year-old computer technology. Fantastic. Brilliant. I'm just gonna say one thing to Chelsea's Tesla double story. We shifted the show notes around a bit, Chris, so you didn't miss out on talking about your study. But Chelsea, there was an article in Jalopnik a couple of weeks ago, which
there always?
we know through various channels. I can tell you that it upset Tesla quite a lot. How about that?
Yes.
And I can't help but wonder if the announcement of the battery swap and the 400-mile Tesla Roadster, neither of which are actually things that you can touch and feel yet. I mean, the battery swap is a beta program. The 400-mile car is not coming yet. It's being promised. I can't help but wonder if that's Elon Musk or Tesla's PR team basically sticking its tongue out at people like Jalopnik, and who've been looking at the stock price drop, who've been looking at various other things and going, ooh, things are not as they should be.
Yeah, I don't think it's specifically a tongue out at Jalopnik, but there's no question that that article got under Tesla's skin, as well as, I'm sure, a couple other writers who have sort of been grinding Tesla's particular axe for the last few weeks. And, we've seen this before, so much so that even I tweeted, I think I smell a blog post coming from Elon, and the next day he posted one. This is the pattern for Tesla, where, the stock struggles a little bit and people start to raise some questions in the media, and then there's an announcement. And they have figured out that, at least for now, they are able... their PR strategy can kind of be Elon tweeting. And they've gotten away with that for this long, and they continue to, and that's all. If it works for them, fantastic.
I've got to be,
but there is a pattern there.
Yeah, I've got to be honest though. I think that in some ways, Elon Musk and Tesla needs to develop a different way of dealing with it, because I don't think
there's any question about that.
There's we saw what happened with Apple. With the celebrity of Steve Jobs, it works when Jobs was well. As soon as Jobs became ill and things became a bit rocky, and Tim Cook's worked very hard to rebuild the Apple brand, but Tim Cook has worked. Tim Cook is not the front man of Apple in the same way that Steve Jobs was, and I think it's a much healthier Apple with Tim Cook at the helm than it was with Apple, which is an interesting thing. All right, Chris, thank you for waiting. So we were going to talk to you about your time at Volvo. Tell us about that.
I had an internship. I worked in the wind tunnel. It was an interesting experience.
So how did you get into that as was that straight out of school or?
Yeah, when I was in college, I was in a group or program for internship exchanges. So we found internships for people from other countries to come and do in engineering, and then we were able to send our members to do internships in other countries. So I had one in Sweden at Volvo.
And it piqued my interest because I've always been a bit fond of Volvo, because they have engineers who are brutally honest with you and tell you exactly what they're thinking. And that always made me smile and feel quite safe with Volvo engineers, because they tend not to beat around the bush as much as some car companies. And then you worked as an energy auditor, and then you taught English in Peru. How do you go from Volvo to energy auditing to working in Peru?
Well, so the Volvo job was just an internship. They weren't hiring or anything. They were actually laying people off at the time I was there, so I didn't continue working there. And then when I came back to the U.S., I found a job as an energy auditor. That just was the job that I found. And then I stayed there for a while, and then I stopped doing that. And then I decided to travel around in Peru for a while. I had kind of an independent consulting company.
Cool.
I was going to be doing the energy consulting and traveling at the same time, but then the economy crashed, so my consulting went away, so I got a job as an English teacher.
Wow. Very resilient. Well, we'll be coming back in a second. We're going to have an ad break. And when we come back, we'll be talking about the study, the whole reason you're on. So everyone watching at home, stay there and we'll be right back. Do you enjoy the show? Do you like wearing fun and unique clothes that support the things you love? Then you're going to want to head over to www.transportevolved.com/shop, where you can show support of Transport Evolved by buying one of our fabulous Transport Evolved branded apparel. We've got everything from hoodies and t-shirts to water bottles, badges and tote bags, and they'll be sent direct from our partners at Spreadshirt to your home address in double quick time. What's more, by buying something from our shop, you'll be sending us a little kickback as a thanks for our hard work on the show. And you'll get something unique and fun, and we'll get some warm, fuzzy feelings knowing we can continue to bring you a great show every week. What's not to love? We're back. It's obviously one of those days when everything's going wrong. One of my studio lights has just blown up. It's just... as someone was saying in the chat room, it's a Christmas miracle we're actually even still here. All right, we're with the fantastic Chelsea Sexton and also Chris Tessum. Now, Chris is on today because he's talking about a study, and I don't normally get report authors on. I don't normally get academics on the show. Maybe if you enjoy this, maybe this is something we should do again in the future. But one of the things that has been in the news a lot in the last couple of weeks is a story about a study which some news outlets, including people like AP, Chelsea, used as a battering ram against plug-in vehicles and future fuels of all sorts.
Well, I mean, like I said, we are a fantastic circular firing squad in a lot of ways, and one of them happens to be on all of the various pollution criteria involved in different fuels, as if that is the only thing that matters. Right.
And we can all get along maybe a little better. But before we talk to Chris, I'd just like to play the video, Chris, that accompanied the publishing of your report. Because I think this will explain a lot about the study and where it comes from. We'll have some questions for you when we come back. Oh, so we have some audio problems with this one, Chris, I'm afraid. So maybe you can talk us through it while the video is playing. So this is a study into the carbon footprint, essentially, of various different types of fuel, right? Oh, we've lost him again. Are you still there, Chris? Nope, he's gone. Which is a shame, really. I tell you what, we'll see if we can get this video playing with the audio, and then we'll see if we can get Chris on.
Because growing corn and turning it into ethanol creates...
It's having a really bad day.
I am a lot of air pollution. Using it is worse for air quality and health than gasoline. If we also consider the impacts of these fuels on climate change, we find that ethanol from corn grain is still worse than gasoline, but ethanol from agricultural...
Enjoy.
We all know that our vehicles damage the quality of the air we breathe. But have you ever stopped to think that your vehicle's tailpipe is not the only source of pollution from driving? Harmful pollutants are emitted when the fuel you use is pumped from the ground, refined, and transported to your local gas station. Perhaps you fill your tank up with ethanol. Well, the tractors used to grow corn pollute the air too, as do the facilities that ferment and distill corn into ethanol. Maybe you're on the cutting edge and have an electric car. The electricity had to come from somewhere, from coal, natural gas, maybe even a wind turbine or solar panel. Our research uses models to understand how the pollutants emitted in the production and use of the different vehicle fuel options available to us affect the quality of our air. One thing that we found is that electric cars are better than gasoline cars if the electricity comes from renewable sources or from natural gas, but not if the electricity comes from coal. If we're going to use natural gas, we found that it is better for air quality if it is burned to make electricity for an electric vehicle than if it is burned directly in a vehicle engine. We also found that because growing corn and turning it into ethanol creates a lot of air pollution, using it is worse for air quality and health than gasoline. If we also consider the impacts of these fuels on climate change, we find that ethanol from corn grain is still worse than gasoline, but ethanol from agricultural residues, such as corn cobs, might very well be better than both. So, if you're going out today to buy a new gasoline-powered car, we recommend the most fuel-efficient vehicle on your list. If an electric vehicle is an option, that's great, but only if not much of your electricity comes from coal. If you don't know where your electricity comes from, now is a good time to find out. Life cycle air quality impacts of conventional and alternative light-duty transportation in the United States. Written by Christopher W. Tessum, Jason D. Hill, and Julian D. Marshall.
So, I'm hoping, Chris, you're there. Can you hear me? Oh, I don't know what's going on here. Chelsea, save me. This is stuff that we already knew, isn't it?
It is, yes. I mean, look, certainly some of this is a more pessimistic outcome, pessimistic study than, say, Union of Concerned Scientists and some others in terms of hyping EVs, even on coal, as that much worse than gasoline. But I don't know any credible EV advocate that's arguing for EVs charged on coal. And in fact, coal is such a shrinking feedstock for electricity in the US anyway, that this takes a small potential fuel feedstock that's used in primarily 5 areas that don't sell electric cars in the first place, and is a little heavy-handed in how much it's focusing only on that.
Right. I mean, that's something we were going to ask Chris now. Chris, can you hear us now? Chris? Hello, Chris. I don't know quite what's happening with Chris's connection. I don't know. Skype is just being a pain, I think, for us. I think we're just gonna keep trying to get Chris to have Chris on. Chelsea, the other thing that and I'm hoping, Chris, you can still hear us. For some reason we can't hear you. I know there is a problem with certain microphones causing timeouts. We've had this before with guests. Randomly, for some reason, it doesn't happen most of the time. It only happens occasionally. But stay put, Chris, and we will ring you right back. Chelsea, to be fair to Chris and the guys who came up with the study in the first place, the information that they gave in the actual study was far different to the headlines. How do we combat that?
Well, look, it's just sort of a known proposition that media, including friendly media, is going to try to get page views and is going to try to get attention to their stories. And the easiest way to do that, or the most effective way to do that, is to be sensational with them. So of course you're going to pick out the pessimistic part. At the same time, there is some responsibility by the academic side to understand how the information that they're going to put out there is going to be used, and to frame it as best as possible in order to add some perspective.
Right. So essentially what you're saying there is that there is a duty of care, both at the academic level, but also at the journalistic level, to ensure that those who are actually covering this are covering it appropriately. That's essentially what you're saying.
I mean, in a perfect world. Now, the reality is a lot of what people like me do is end up doing the interpreting in the middle and the going back and adding perspective afterwards and pulling people off the ceiling in that regard. Right. So it would be nice if everyone sort of took a breath and addressed the stories that way. Obviously, that's unrealistic. Yeah. But as researchers and as advocates, we have to understand how the information is going to be used, preempt it where possible, and frame the right stories so that it's responsible to both sides, not fluffy and everything's running on unicorn dust, but there are some realities. There are also a lot of advantages despite the realities. There is not going to be any perfect solution involved in any of this. Right. But we have to get past continually focusing on coal as if it is the primary feedstock for electric cars. It never has been, and it is not now.
Chris?
And it is less so every day.
Chris, can you hear me now? And are you able to talk? There is a really terrible problem with Chris's. He's just frozen. I feel really sorry for Chris because he's sort of come on the show to talk about his study, and now his Skype connection.
And now he's having to listen to everybody else talk about his study.
Chris, I do apologise. We're going to try ringing you back one last time, and if it doesn't work, we'll have to get you on in a future week. I think that's probably going to be the best way of doing it. Chelsea, the other thing that I was really interested in was the problems that we're having with regard to the people who are saying hydrogen has a better carbon footprint than electrics, or any fuel has a better carbon footprint than another fuel. You kind of alluded to it earlier. That's really the circular firing squad, and it's not necessarily the best way of dealing with things, is it?
No, I mean, look, there's a place for that conversation. And I, of all people, have been incredibly frustrated with the double standards that are unfortunately consistent in the hydrogen versus EVs conversation. As unproductive as that conversation is to begin with, we are at a stage where the hydrogen folks are basically saying, well, just trust us on every credible question related to hydrogen fuel cells. And yet these are the same people that have poked endless holes in all things EVs and demanded endless data and asked endless questions that they are now unwilling to answer about their own choice of fuel and propulsion. So that's always going to be frustrating. At the same time, the efficiency of all of this, of any of these fuels, is one aspect in the overall picture. There are so many others that will actually be bigger hurdles to cross in deploying these vehicles. So it will come down much more to things like cost, the experience of the vehicles themselves, the cost of the fuel, the availability of the fuel. All of those sorts of things are going to matter more than if at the end of the day it takes slightly more energy to power a hydrogen car than an EV. So I'm with the hydrogen folks on, I'm not with them on how much they dismiss the question and sort of say to the other side, well, you shouldn't even ask the question, shame on you. Well, that's baloney too. But yes, we do focus too much on the comparative efficiencies of hydrogen versus EVs if, in fact, all other things are equal and they're both better than gasoline. Certainly, we're not in a place where we can afford to dismiss every solution because they're not all going to be the same. Right. At the same time, there are some super legitimate questions around each of these different fuels, and in particular these days, hydrogen, that are not being addressed. And millions of dollars being thrown at the technology without that substance behind it.
Right. Now, Chris, we're trying one last time. Hello, Chris.
Hi.
You're back. Fantastic. Right, so I'm really sorry about the problems we've been having. Right, so while you've been gone, while we've been trying to get you back, I don't know if it's your connection, my connection. We've got no trouble with the stream, so I'm gonna lay the blame with your ISP. As it's holidays, people's internet connections are a bit dodgy. So, Chris, the methodology behind this, Chelsea has said he's gone again. It's just, this is so frustrating. He's just gone again. It's just a nightmare. Okay, you know what we're going to do, Chelsea? We're gonna shelve this story and we're gonna come back to it maybe in a future week.
I think that's wise.
When we've got things a little bit better. And at this point in the show, we would normally have an ad, but we can't. Chris, are you there now?
I'm here.
Oh, you're here, audio only. Hello.
Hi.
Take it.
Hello. Right, we're back. He's audio only. So, Chris, there have been a lot of claims, and actually, I think this is working better. There've been a lot of claims that that electric cars are no good in the past. And one of the things that Chelsea has sort of commented on is when we're examining carbon footprint of electric vehicles, we do tend to concentrate maybe a bit too much on coal, because the majority of people who own plug-in vehicles do use greener sources. Chelsea, I hope I've paraphrased that correctly.
Fair enough.
Yep. So what do you say to that, Chris?
Well, I'm from Minnesota. My understanding is that, I'm not an expert in this area, but my understanding is that Minnesota, is not California in terms of its electrical vehicle adoption, but it's one of we have one of the higher rates of adoption here, but we also have a lot of coal electricity generation. Mm-hmm. And, as if electric vehicles are adopted more widely across the country, there are obviously areas that use a lot of coal for electricity generation.
So,
and there's, yeah.
So essentially, what you're saying is one of these graphics you've got here. You're saying that essentially at the moment people are using renewables, but you're predicting, because this is 10 years. This is into 2020, isn't it? So it's actually not 10 years. It's 4 years time. Or 5 years time, 2015, we're coming up now. This is a prediction based on more people making a switch to a particular vehicle type. And it was 10% of the total number of vehicles on the road in 2020, wasn't it?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say, I'm sure some people use renewables to power electric vehicles now, but some of them also just use electricity from the grid. Natural gas in California, there's a lot of it. And there's another thing, there's the EPA has passed the mercury and air toxic standard recently, or they made it a regulation. And that would reduce the air pollution caused by electric vehicles. But the thing is that that standard is being challenged in the Supreme Court now, the Supreme Court. So if that standard is struck down, then we won't be seeing the reductions in pollution from coal power generation that would otherwise.
Okay, but the argument still stands, doesn't it, Chelsea, that those who are making the decision to go to a plug-in vehicle are automatically going to want to try and find cleaner ways of refueling?
I wouldn't say, there's some people that would adopt electric vehicles because it's cheaper to run them, right? Especially as the batteries become cheaper, those vehicles may be the cheapest option, and they may not be, depending on what our electricity grid looks like. That's something we need to consider, if they're coming from polluting sources or not.
Okay, Chelsea, you were going to say something there.
Well, look, I think it's very dangerous to try to hold a technology responsible for something as granular as, in many cases, the city or county in which it's used. But at the same time, it is a foregone conclusion that the grid is getting cleaner for a variety of policy reasons, from state renewable portfolio standards to federal policies, such that the dirtiest day a plug-in car will ever have, even if you only ever charge it off the grid, is the day you drive it home. It's not automatic that plug-in drivers, to Chris's comments, automatically look for cleaner ways to charge their vehicles, but there is a significant overlap. It's 30-40%, depending on who you ask, in terms of EV drivers that already had or end up getting solar to power their EVs. So distributed generation plays a role as well. But there is, I think, even more so, given his explanation, too much of a heavy-handed focus on coal as perceived as a bigger feedstock for grid electricity than it actually is, especially when you overlay the markets in which EVs actually sell.
Right. Chris?
My understanding, I don't have the number in front of me, but coal is about, so the estimate that we used in 2020, that coal would be 45% of electricity generation. There's different estimates out there, and they change over time, but that was the Energy Information Administration projection for the year 2020.
Okay.
So that relies on coal increasing in the grid mix compared to where it is. And
Actually, I think it was 40%. It's decreasing.
Okay.
I think it's 46% now.
All right,
I mean, I don't have these numbers in front of me, but that's what I remember.
Okay, let's look at the corn side of things, because ethanol has been, again, pushed as a green fuel by a lot of people. And actually, based on the figures here, corn doesn't do very well either, does it? Corn ethanol.
No, when you so a lot of people think of corn ethanol as a green fuel because it comes from a plant that is physically green, the corn plant. But the thing is that in order to go from just having a field to having ethanol, there need to be a lot of things that happen. You need to farm the field, you need to put on fertilizer, run the tractors around, and then you need to transport the corn and refine it into ethanol. All those processes have emissions that end up, when you kind of combine them all together, end up being larger than the emissions from the comparable processes for gasoline.
Okay, so let's talk about wheel to well here, because it's something that comes up a lot in discussions of your study, which is available online, isn't it?
Yep.
Yep. And it's on it's actually linked to from your website. So if you go to the link that's on screen now, you can actually find the study from there. Now, in the study, electric vehicles based on coal fared towards the worst end of the spectrum. Electric vehicles charged wind, wave and solar, or wind, water and solar, I think is what you called it, were at the high end of the kind of the best for carbon emissions, carbon footprint, etc., etc.
We mainly focused on air pollution, public health impacts from air pollution.
Okay, so one of the things that kind of a couple of things that I was curious about was, and various people have commented, there seems to be very little difference between gasoline and diesel vehicles, despite diesel vehicles having a higher level of particulate emissions. And you know, we've had a situation recently where France has really France has sort of come clean and gone, we did back the wrong horse when it comes to green vehicles, and diesels are not as green as we thought they were. Similar backlash now happening in California, isn't it, Chelsea?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, but yet on the graphics here, there seems to be very little difference between the gasoline hybrid and diesel, Chris. Perhaps you can explain that.
Yeah, well, we assume that the diesel vehicles that are in our study will have particulate filters or other technologies to control the pollution, which do exist, and they are, in order to have a vehicle that passes the standards, my understanding is that you need to have a filter on it. Again, I'm not an expert on this, but that's my understanding. So we assume that those control technologies are in place in our study. The issue is that, it's hard to enforce, it's hard to make sure that these things are continue to be running correctly on all the vehicles that are out there in the fleet. Right.
And I'm gonna kind of bring in a bit of a joker here. The rolling coal guys, they purposely modify their vehicles to produce larger amounts of gunk and particulate emissions out of the tail end of normally pickup trucks, but I've seen some diesel cars that have been rolling coal as well. It's a trend that seems to be on the increase. Now, there are people at the EPA and other organisations and legislative groups throughout the US trying to fight that. In fact, one of our previous guests, Timothy Eustace, representative from New Jersey, he has been working very hard to try and cut down on the rolling coal. But that also does, of course, pose a problem. And I suppose this is a challenge with any kind of academic study. Looking forward is having figures that look like they make sense. Now, if we can go now back to the wheel to well, because I kind of mentioned it and didn't talk about it. Where do you start the study from? Do you look from the point at which the oil is pumped out of the ground? Do you look at the point at which the oil is delivered to the refinery? Where do we actually cover well to wheel all the way through?
Yeah.
Right. And is that for domestic fossil fuels, or is that for fossil fuels that's been imported?
Well, so we only look at domestic things that happen within the United States. And the issue for that is that so we focus on public health impacts from air pollution rather than greenhouse gases. The greenhouse gases are in the study too, but we focus on the air pollution. And it's kind of requires complicated models to predict the air quality impacts accurately or as well as possible, and we're only really able to do that for the United States.
Right. Okay. So you're assuming all the oil is domestic oil.
Well, we're assuming that 45% of the oil is domestic, but we are just to neglect the emissions that occur outside of the United States.
Okay.
So this is okay or we feel that it's okay for the things that we look at because not very many of the emissions occur outside of the United States. So extracting oil actually doesn't create a large amount of emissions of air pollutants.
Okay, right. So Chelsea, you're smiling. Do you want to jump in there?
Nope.
No? Okay. Right. So we're talking, just to clarify, Chris, 45% coming from within the US, mm-hmm. and your study covers getting it out of the ground to putting it in the car. But you're not taking into consideration the 65% that's come from abroad before it enters into the country?
We do, but we don't. So we don't consider, we account for all of the oil, but we only account for the emissions from the processes that occur inside the United States. So if the oil is extracted in Saudi Arabia, we don't track the emissions from the extraction, we don't track the emissions from transporting it to the United States, but we do track all of the emissions after it gets reached in our borders. And it's not as really big of a deal as it might sound, because extracting oil doesn't really create a lot of pollution, and transporting it does create pollution, but it's over the open ocean, so it doesn't really impact public health that much.
Okay. Doesn't impact public health in the US, I'm guessing, as opposed to globally. So a lot of people, when they think about air pollution, they're thinking about climate change or global warming, right? So what happens with climate change is you have carbon dioxide emissions. They go up into the atmosphere, they mix around pretty well, and it doesn't really matter where the emissions come from. It doesn't really impact the overall impacts from the emissions of CO2, right? You can emit CO2 in the middle of the ocean or right in the middle of a city, and it doesn't matter. For air pollution emissions, so things that impact public health directly, like fine particulate matter or ground level ozone, those, it's very important where the emissions come from. So for instance, if you're walking down a major highway, you may notice that your lungs will kind of start to sting. You can smell strong diesel fumes, right? So when the emissions are very close to you, they have larger health impacts, right? If the emissions are in the middle of the ocean, usually they'll be, or they can be, I mean, it's a complicated system, but they would be more likely to be removed from the atmosphere before they actually reach any people and are inhaled. I think I understand. I'm going to be completely honest with you on this one. I think I understand what you're saying. All right.
Yeah, so it's another way to look at it is it's a complicated issue, and we've done a relatively complicated analysis. So it's you can pick apart individual parts of it, but there are a lot of different complicated issues that we've looked at.
And of course, we can't cover everything in this show. And I'm not intending to, because I feel that would do you guys a disservice. It would do everything else a disservice. Before we go, though, I would also like to just chat with you a second about the battery production, because that's a very interesting one, because not all plug-in vehicles are currently batteries are not all currently being made domestically. And my question to you here is, I'm guessing it means you're not accounting for all the battery production either, any battery production that occurs outside of the US.
Yep. So we're not accounting for. We assume that the battery actually assembly occurs in the United States, but some of the extraction of the raw materials happens outside of the U.S. So a big one there is going to be the lithium mining, which I think a lot of it happens in Chile, if I remember correctly.
Right.
And so, we're missing that. We do a sensitivity analysis in the study where we tried doubling the overall impacts from battery production to see if that will kind of change any of our conclusions. And it doesn't. It makes the battery production more polluting, but it doesn't change any kind of the main conclusions that we made in the study.
And when we're talking about domestic, final question, I promise, and then I'm going to ask Chelsea if she's got any questions or any comments to make. When we're talking about the oil and the compressed natural gas and any natural gas used to generate electricity, are we talking about fracked or other methods?
So we include another sensitivity analysis in our study where we look at the leaking of methane from fracking and how that impacts the climate change emissions. And it doesn't end up making really a very big difference because the methane extraction isn't a large part of the life cycle emissions from the well-to-wheels emissions, as you're calling them, from the natural gas life cycle. But we don't look at air pollution, like non-greenhouse gas air pollution emissions, because the thing is that there's not really much good information or really any very solid information out there that we're aware of about what those emissions are.
Okay, which brings us to kind of the feel of the study. As I read the abstract, was that this should not be used to pick or choose winners or losers, but it should be used to help policymakers and countries make decisions moving forward about which energy sources they should promote and which ones they shouldn't. I noticed that hydrogen fuel cell vehicles was not included on the study. I don't know if that was because you didn't feel it was a viable transportation solution for the future.
So no, it's not that. We stuck with all types of vehicles that are currently in production and kind of at volume. I understand that there are some commercial hydrogen fuel cell vehicles now, but they don't quite have the market that the other ones do that we looked at.
Okay. Chelsea, do you have anything that you want to comment or add?
Well, I'm finding it hard to comment productively because some of the assumptions are so very unusual. However, I think the one thing that we can all agree on is it doesn't serve anyone to replace one dirty fuel with another.
Right.
And that none of these are going to be perfect solutions. Mm-hmm. And all of this is a conversation that should continue, but maybe not as the sole focus.
Yeah. And I think also as we move forward, and that was a very considered reply there, Chelsea. I think one of the things
it happens once in a while.
I think one of the things that we need to be really mindful of is that what is our end goal with all of this? What's our end goal for the future of our transportation? Why does Transport Evolved even exist? And it's something that I focus on quite a lot, which is the reason why Transport Evolved exists, the reason why I cover this technology and we question and we're not just a fan site for a particular fuel type. We're not rah electric, rah hydrogen, rah gasoline, hybrid, whatever. We want people to stop and question and ask the questions themselves about the different fuel types. We want people to come here for information so they can decide for themselves whether the information we're providing is something that's useful to them or not, or whether they should go and read a study and take that study on board, or whether they should disregard that study. And there's been a really, really healthy chat room taking place throughout the show today talking about this.
Always is.
It was a fantastic chance to get you on the show, Chris. I am gonna ask you sort of any final comments, and then I'm gonna let you go, not because we don't want you on the rest of the show, but because you are only audio only, and I suspect your connection is not as stable as we would like it to be to take part fully. So do you have anything else that you want to add before we move on?
Yeah, so a lot of the media coverage that we've gotten has focused on how the headlines have been electric vehicles are bad for the environment, or people that own electric vehicles are actually not as green as they think they are. And that's not really how, I mean, those results are there in our study, but they're not the ones that we feel are most important. What we feel is, what we would take away from the results that we got is that we have this opportunity to really cause a big decrease, more than 50% decrease in the air pollution-related deaths from transportation by adopting electric vehicles and powering them with clean electricity. And this is an opportunity that all of the technology more or less exists for now. We just need to be careful that we're cleaning up the electric grid at the same time as we adopt the electric vehicles. Otherwise, we won't see those benefits.
Okay. That's a very considered reply. Thank you very much. And where can people go to read the study if they want to read it for themselves?
Well, I think you have our website. If you go under publications there, you can also search for the title. It's at pnas.org. Fantastic.
And what's next for you? Because you're a PhD candidate.
Yep. I actually just defended my dissertation a couple of weeks ago. So
congratulations!
Yeah.
Congratulations. And what's next?
I'm starting to work as a postdoctoral researcher to kind of do some further looking into some of these same issues.
Great. We'll look forward to hearing from you in the future. I'm going to say goodbye now. Thank you very much for joining us on the show. Have a great Happy New Year, and maybe we'll have you back on next time you've got another paper. Thanks very much for joining us, Chris.
Okay,
all the best.
thanks.
Take care. Bye-bye. Well, that was interesting, Chelsea.
Yes, it was.
That was very interesting. We are going to have a quick ad break, and in the interim period, what we're going to do is we are going to tell you a little bit about why we don't have an ad right now. It's an ad break without an ad. For those of you who don't know, Transport Evolved used to receive donations from its listeners, its readers, its supporters, and you could take out a monthly subscription to the show. But come 1st of January, which is a few days from now, new rules come into force in Europe, and that means that we will no longer be able to easily accept donations, and so we've removed the donation facility from our website. So that leads us to two things. Number one, we are now focusing a little bit more on our ads, so we are now going to be ad supported by external ad agencies. So if you know anybody who wants to advertise in the show, get in touch. We'd love to hear from you. And also, I would just like to say there have been a couple of people who've contacted us and said, can we make our donations before the end of the year so that we don't make you fall foul of the new regulations in Europe? Yes, you can. If you want to make a donation in the next 2 days, do so. But then after that point, we won't be able to accept any at all. Now Chris is gone, I can show you the desktop of the computer that Chris was calling on. Do you recognise that car, Chelsea?
I can't really see it.
It's I'm just not going to tell anybody what it is, and then maybe someone in the chat room can bring it up a bit later on. Okay, so we're into the final part of the show. This is the fun bit, Chelsea, where we get to talk about the year, the things that have happened in the year, and some of the predictions that we made. So, where have all the major automakers been this year? Let's have a scorecard. Let's start with Nissan. Where's Nissan been this year?
Nissan's been sort of holding firm on Leaf in particular, and has maintained at least steady, if not increasing sales, depending on the month you look at. There's been a little bit of moving around within the company, but that doesn't seem to have affected the overall zero emissions tentpole in terms of a priority for the company. Cool.
And they've done some weird things this year. So they've done the weird and wacky paint car, the one that's mud free. It's got a hydrophilic coating or hydrophobic coating on it, right?
Right.
Which is a bit weird. The self-driving cars, Shinzo Abe's been quite busy with those. driving around in those. And the pickup, which I've got to talk about, right? Their pickup truck.
I know you have to.
Just lovely. Okay, so out of 10, where are we going to give Nissan out of 10? 0 being rubbish, 10 being pretty good.
Look, I mean, they still have, the occasional hiccup here and there, but I don't think there's any question that Nissan is all in on electric cars. So from a commitment standpoint, it's a 10. Execution is going to vary a little bit for every company.
Right. Okay. Let's move on. Tesla. How's Tesla done this year?
Tesla overall has done very, very well. I mean, again, same thing. Kind of the hiccups here and there. Got to get out of their own way in spots, but they continue to sell cars and deliver. And we'll see what the next couple of years bring for them. The stuff that is more concerning, the delays with Model X and that kind of thing, didn't really manifest this year, even though it kind of became obvious.
Right. And one of the things that that Tesla was promising last year was that we were going to see the 2017 Model 3 at Detroit in January 2015. Is that going to happen?
Doesn't seem to be the case.
No. So a year ago we were talking about that. We were getting quite excited about it, but now, no. And I think someone in the chat room may have got it. It is an Enfield electric car that's sitting next to Chelsea, which was 1976. Little electric vehicle that was made on the Isle of Wight in the UK. Bit of a bizarre little car, and it's now being there is now one owned by Johnny Smith, the Fifth Gear, and he's turning it into a street legal dragster that he says wants to build. He wants to beat a Tesla Roadster on the drag strip. He's filled it with really expensive Cockham batteries, 2 electric motors from, we're talking drag racing electric motors here, and he's got a prop shaft that is the size of a Coke bottle. So that says everything. All right, let's move on. GM, Chelsea. GM, how are we doing with GM?
GM, I think is...
I don't know what's going on. Sorry, let's carry on. GM, how are they doing?
They're the Volt is still selling. It's been, waning a little bit in terms of sales, but let's face it, so is the marketing. And the Spark is a compliance car, so they've been sort of doing what they need to do there. I think really the next year is going to be more telling for GM. I'm concerned. But
you are concerned about GM?
I am. I have been for quite a while now, actually.
Okay.
And that's no secret. Yeah, I mean, as the Volt launched and the engagement and marketing dropped off, that's a problem. And so they do need to get arms around that and reintroduce some faces and re-engage, amp up the marketing again. How much of that is waiting around for the Gen 2 Volt unveiling? I don't know. I have fingers crossed that it is, and that when that car's unveiled in Detroit, hopefully the gates will open again on the rest of it. It remains to be seen.
Look, GM under Mary Barra is a very different company, isn't it, to GM previously? GM has really changed its strategy in 2014, hasn't it? It's pulling out of a lot of markets. It's focusing on the US. It's pulling out a lot of its American brands. So Chevrolet's coming out, Chevrolet's coming out, and obviously there have been a number of people that have been disappointed by that, me included, because I'm a Chevy Volt owner in the UK and I'm not going to get any support anymore. GM's focusing on local brands a bit more. So it's focusing on its Holden brand in Australia, it's focusing on its Opel brand in Europe, and its Vauxhall brand in the UK. It does leave us without a plug-in car in Europe, doesn't it, Chelsea? From GM.
It certainly does. Although there are others there that are ready to take up that particular bit of slack.
Yep, that's true. What do you... okay, so we didn't score Tesla and we didn't score GM. So can we score Tesla?
Well, I mean, I think for who Tesla is and what they're trying to do and the resources with which they have to do it, I think they too score, as a 10. It's hard to fault what they have pulled off in that context, even though some of the fluffiness around it drives us batshit crazy sometimes. But yeah, I mean, they are so clearly all in, and I do really like the pivot towards the experience and customer focus, and I think that has saved their bacon to some degree, no question, and that makes up for a lot. I mean, I think we have to be a bit subjective in the evaluations on all of these companies that takes into consideration the stage of the market we're in and the customers that they have. So this is not the traditional metrics of the auto industry, and this is not completely volume driven or headline driven or any of those things. I mean, it is much more of a total picture and understanding how putting EVs on the road is different and a different mission than putting internal combustion on the road.
Right.
And that those metrics are not going to be the same. So the biggest concern with GM is it is reverted so much to the traditional model. And if we know anything from the last 20 years of EVs, it is that building a good car is not enough. And where everybody has struggled has never been about the car itself. The Volt's a great car.
Yeah.
You know, that's not up for debate. It's an awesome car. Building a plug-in car, sticking it in a showroom and walking away and assuming it's all going to be fine isn't enough.
And I've seen so many people get so frustrated with Vauxhall, the British, effectively the British arm of GM this year, because they've seen Ampere's in showrooms. They've gone in to inquire about them and been told, sorry mate, we don't actually sell that car, it's just here to look good, or words to that effect.
Right.
And there's a very, very little dealer engagement, and et cetera, et cetera. All right, how about BMW? They're the other ones that I'm focusing on here.
BMW, for me, it's a little soon to really call. And even on GM, I don't want to give them too short shrift, but I would put them more towards like a 7 than really up there. And BMW, kind of a 7 or an 8 still for me. I mean, it's lovely to be enthusiastic about it when it's new. It's what happens when that newness wears off. They also are... just at the last CARB meeting, BMW was there arguing for concessions that would, in theory, enable them to sell fewer cars in some states. So, this isn't a philanthropic endeavor, and I don't think we should kid ourselves about that. I think BMW looks very promising, but the proof is in the pudding. After the first year. Okay. And does it truly become a nationwide car?
We'll have to wait and find out, I think, on that one.
Yeah.
All right, so on to our predictions from last year. If for those of you who remember...
And now we're on to our final segment of the show. The one I geeked about at the start.
This is me last year.
This is what we think is going to be big this year. For 2014, we think there are going to be 4 big areas we'll be covering. So here's our brief rundown of each. Last year, self-driving car technology really started to gain speed, at least in the prototype phase. So expect more and more self-driving goodness from all the major automakers this year as they scramble to head off Nissan's apparent lead. We think Tesla will also demonstrate some form of the technology towards the end of the year that hints at self-driving, although unlike its rivals, we think Tesla will only show us the tech when it's ready for market. 2013 was the year of the dying charging network, and we think 2014 will blow away all of that with the birth of reliable pay-as-you-go charging infrastructure, and we hope the minimising of those darned RFID smart cards. But it'll be a slow progress. Expect weaker charging networks to die off and a few major companies to dominate the marketplace on each continent. We also think that charging networks will start to struggle with the fight between CHAdeMO, CCS, and whatever other charging station someone is crazy enough to come up with. Tesla, meanwhile, will just keep on rolling out its superchargers with minimal fuss, although we should note it's probably going to be slower than Tesla would like it. After 3 years of mediocre range for most EVs on the market, we think 2014 will see early mid-cycle updates from most automakers, offering perhaps as much as 10 or 20% increase in real-world range for 2015 model years. With Nissan already hinting at better battery tech, we think 2015 model years will also be able to achieve the magic 100 miles per charge if they're electric only, while plug-in hybrids and range-extended EVs will all fight it out for the best possible range with the smaller battery packs they have. We can't wait, although we do think Tesla will still beat everyone else into submission in the range war.
All right, so let's take those ones so far. So I said, it was me last year, we're going to have more self-driving car, we're going to see some form of demonstration from Tesla. Did we get that right, Chelsea?
Not for 2014, no.
No. Well, but we said we were going to see some form of demonstration of the technology from Tesla, and I think I'm going to give myself partial credit for that one, because we did get the autonomous drive thing, even though it didn't come to market.
Look, I think as a category, we started to see a bit of it in 2014. We'll see more of it in 2015. Whether or not Tesla is the company everybody's talking about. I mean, certainly Nissan's very aggressive, and I think people tend to sort of not pay much attention to what Audi's doing, when in fact they're among the most aggressive.
They are. They're really, really big. And that demonstration around Hockenheim Ring was really impressive as well, even though it was, pre-programmed. All right, charging. We said that we were going to get a bit more consensus on charging, some of the smaller networks going away, and a push towards pay-as-you-go. We haven't seen that at all, really, have we?
No.
Why?
We have seen a focus on trying to get more reliable charging, and we'll continue to see that. But I think that charging, the wars, so to speak, are going to continue to shake out for at least another year or two.
And we've seen some really big cock-ups as well. So in London, Source London has now been taken over by Bolloré. And I don't want to talk about this too much, lest I say something that I might get into trouble for. But let's just say the Source London, when Bolloré took over Source London, I don't think they didn't really plan for it being quite as much as a head screw as it actually was. Charging stations not working, charging stations being broken. I pulled in, case in point, I pulled in at a charging station in London the other day. One side was working, the British 3-pin socket, which is only 2 kilowatts. And the other side, which is a 7 kilowatt post, which I wanted to use, was not working. And I rang them up and I said to them, please, can you reset the station? And they went, we'd love to, but this isn't our station. It belongs to PodPoint. Yeah. So they had to then ring up another provider to get them to reset it. And it was 2 days before Christmas, and they just turned around to me and said, we're sorry, no one answered the phone. I mean, that's not acceptable, is it? And it's not just the UK, it's being repeated all over the world. So I got that one wrong. I talked about range increases in electric cars and push towards 100-mile ranges. We haven't really seen that. There have been a couple of cars come onto the market this year that have been better in terms of range and efficiency, most noticeably the Kia Soul EV, which pushes up towards that 100-mile barrier by virtue of having a 27 kilowatt-hour battery pack. And that's only around town as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. We've not seen substantive increases in range. And in fact, we have yet to see really any car, and certainly no volume car, that groks the need for a true 100-mile real-world range. Not even real-world at any cost and under any condition, just good, basic, solid 100 miles in decent ambient temperature with some minimal accessories.
Right. And then the final one is, I said we were going to see a price war between car companies with major EVs being dropped in price. We saw a little bit of that, but not a huge amount, did we?
No, not price war this year. Last year, more.
Yeah,
this year.
Yeah. I mean, we had a couple of drops. So Toyota dropped its Prius again, didn't it? Prius plug-in.
Yeah, but I mean, where we have seen drops, and Ford's another example, is with cars that were priced out of line to begin with.
Right.
And in particular among compliance cars. So because they are compliance cars and the whole goal is to need to earn a certain number of credits, there have had to be some adjustments to get more in line with the competition so that they can remain competitive enough to get the credits they need. But it's never been a price war from a competitive standpoint.
Okay, now we had these predictions last year. I'm going to play you just a snippet. If you want to watch the whole show from last year, please go back and watch it. That's not the right button anyway. It's not showing. That was a Toyota Mirai. I don't know why it was there. We did have some predictions from last year from Mr. Mark.
But I've got 2 that are BMW based and 2 that aren't. My BMW ones are, I don't think the i3 is going to live up to everyone's expectations. I think there are going to be... Can
you codify that a bit? Because no car ever lives up to everybody's expectations.
The i3 is the latest wonder child of the EV movement. It's being heralded as the car that will make everything better in the same way that the Zoe was and in the same way that the Leaf was. And it can't live up to that. I've not driven it, I will admit, and I'd love to drive it and I'd love to try it. But I've seen and spoken to people who seem to think it will work indefinitely and it will go on. And I've heard contradictions from 2 different BMW reps about how it works and how it will work. And there's so much confusion out there that there are going to be a few people, just like there are with the Leaf, the 2013 Leaf, with people trying to return the car because it won't get 100 miles, even though they were promised it will. The same thing's going to happen to the i3. It's not going to be.
So that was Mark's, sorry Mark, I didn't mean to cut you off, but that was Mark's major prediction from last year. Also that well, let's do that one. So he said the BMW i3, won't live up to people's expectations and the hype. Chelsea, has it?
I think it's done well so far. And in fact, some were so cynical after the Mini E and Active E programs that I think it's probably exceeded some people's expectations. At the same time, this is the part that's too soon to tell. I mean, to some degree, the i3 has done as well as it has because it's been the only new thing that people could really get, in particular outside of California.
Right.
So if you didn't want a Leaf or a Volt and couldn't afford a Tesla, i3 has been your choice. And it is kind of a cool vehicle, but it's like every other vehicle on Earth, is not for everyone.
Right.
And what happens to it as other things start to come to market remains to be seen. I think it'll do okay through 2015 because there isn't a whole lot coming to market and certainly nothing beyond compliance. I think the Volt will continue to struggle at least through the first half until the new version comes out, and i3 will be able to pick up some of that slack. Same thing may happen with Leaf. I'm not sure. They've been really good about keeping sales up given that the Leaf is now several years old, but as that continues to age another year, sales may or may not change a little bit, and i3 may benefit there.
It's interesting because we also had John Volker on last year's end of year show, and he predicted that we would see a bit of a split between the regional forward-looking places, the big cities where EVs are more popular, and the dealers, the average BMW dealers out in the sticks. And he said that the BMW success would be extremely regional. I haven't seen that one way or the other. Chelsea, I don't know if you can comment to that.
I haven't looked at it in too granular a fashion, but no, I mean, there hasn't been, other than the usual EVs do some better in some areas than others, there hasn't been a particular split in terms of how the i3 is doing compared to where EVs generally do well. I mean, it's been relatively consistent.
It has.
And at the same time, this is largely an availability issue. We cannot overlook the fact that the Air Resources Board and the 10 states that follow the Air Resources Board plays a huge role in just what is available where, regardless of what the market appetite is.
They do. All right. Mark also said that the combo style rollout, the combo CCS charging standard, wouldn't be full strength until beyond the end of the year, and he predicted there would be less than 10 units in the US and the UK. I'm afraid to say Mark got that one wrong. Well, I'm not afraid to say, I'm quite pleased to say Mark got that one wrong. We have seen more CCS charging stations than that, certainly in Europe, but it's certainly nowhere near the levels of Nissan or Tesla. Chelsea?
No, and I would agree with him, at least in the US, on we've not seen anything that could be categorized as full strength. And what we have seen has been mainly because publicly funded charging networks have been lobbied basically to accommodate everyone. Right. So it's not been because we've got lots of cars that use CCS or the automakers have even in particular been lobbying for it, other than if we're publicly funding chargers, there's been lobbying for we should fund everybody.
All right. And the other thing that he did, talking about charging while we're tying that in, because John Volker came up with one on charging, and he said it was basically we're going to see the importance of fast charging networks in 2014 as people, sort of start to dismiss the lower powered charging and focus on higher powered charging. I think he has partially got that right. We have seen a real growth in faster charging, and the lower power charging has dropped down, but it's still there, partly because of charger station reliability has been so terrible this year.
Right. Yeah, I mean, certainly comparatively, there's been a focus on DC over level 2. The conversation has also shifted, especially for DC, from more charging at any cost to, as you say, reliability. That's a much bigger part of the conversation than it ever was, and it supersedes sheer volume at this point. Now, the flip side of that is at least some tiny little nugget of realization that people are not nearly as reliant on public charging at all.
Right.
As early perceptions indicated. And we've known this forever, that most of the charging happens at home and people use public charging. It's nice to have if you need it, but very rarely do you really need it in terms of getting to where you're going next. And so some of that is starting to shake out. But as more new drivers come online, it's a shift back and forth between that understanding.
Now, we saw the final prediction from Mark was that we were going to have a botched Tesla over-the-air update, which luckily did not happen this year. I don't think we had that. At least if we did, Tesla kept it very quiet. But John's final prediction from last year was, John Volker's final prediction was that the results of the NHTSA investigation into the Tesla fires would be fairly nice towards Tesla, and that Tesla would implement some kind of token safety update to make everyone feel good, and that's exactly what Tesla did. So well done, and that was well called, John. I had 3. I said we were going to see an increase of fighting between auto dealer associations and Tesla, which we have seen, and it has escalated again and again this year, hasn't it? Yep. Do we think it's going to continue into next year?
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Are we going to see a regional court case or a Supreme Court case at any point?
I don't know if we'll see Supreme Court, but I think we'll see continued fighting over it. And look, the reality is this is not about Tesla. Mm-hmm. This is about if Tesla gets the precedent, other automakers could do this. And so, we need to understand what this is actually about. But that's also why we are going to continue to see the fight against Tesla.
And
because the stakes are bigger.
And we're seeing Mini and Mercedes are both looking at it, aren't they, for their customers in the US, and I think somebody else as well. I thought Lexus was looking at it as well, but I'm not entirely sure. All right, I also said that we were going to see a high-profile case or a rise in cases of people moaning about electric cars, about cars not performing as they expected. Now, we haven't had any I haven't been aware of any major cases of people complaining about the range. I've just bought this brand new car and it doesn't go as far as I want. I have seen a couple of them, not really high profile, but there have been a lot of people on Twitter moaning about their cars losing range or not performing as they expect in extreme weather conditions. And that seems to be a matter of education, Chelsea.
It is a matter of education. I mean, it's just like the learning curve there. At the same time, there's sort of public aggregate data on how electric cars work that we should not be seeing spikes in that, or else from an education and marketing perspective, we're doing something really wrong. At the same time, I continue to prod automakers on the let's please under-promise and over-deliver on the range front in the first place. That just because you can advertise a higher number doesn't mean you should. And that is a hard lesson to learn and one that will continue to play out. But, as more people use electric cars and convey their experience to their friends and family and networks, there should be fewer surprises about weather effects and range and, degradation over time. I mean, these things happen to gas cars too in some areas. So
yes, they do.
We just are so used to it, we don't even notice it anymore. And as more experience is aggregated for EVs, that will happen there too.
And my final prediction was that we were going to see an explosion in the second-hand car market for future cars, so electrics particularly. We haven't really seen that yet. It's not really reached a tipping point, and that's a shame. But now I'm going to ask you, Chelsea, to come up with some predictions. I'm going to ask you to do 3 predictions for 2015. To give you a little bit of thinking time, I'm going to come up with one first, which is that the Tesla Model X is not going to hit its goal. It's not going to hit its launch date. I'm sorry, Elon. I think you've got too much on your plate. That's my first prediction. My second prediction, unfortunately, is also about Tesla. I'm sorry, Tesla. And that one is going to pertain to the Model 3. We're not going to see a Model 3 prototype until 2016. It's just not going to happen. If we see one this year, it's going to be very much an alpha car, and it's not going to be anything that anyone's going to be able to drive in. Okay, Chelsea, can you give me two?
I think 2015 is going to be the year of the plug-in hybrid from a conversational perspective and a policy perspective. We have a couple of introductions, but just as much all of the potential, and some of this has been driven by the range extended version of the BMW, for plug-in hybrids to accomplish so much of the goal of EV driving and zero emissions driving than even a pure EV, and certainly than a hydrogen vehicle. So it's not that one is better than the other, but I think there'll be a growing recognition that if done right and if decently electrified, plug-in hybrids can actually do more than they've been given credit for. And we'll see that effect in a variety of ways. It will also continue to be the year of hydrogen fighting, although to some degree it's going to have to come to a head one way or another.
Right.
I think hopefully within this year, it shouldn't drag out too much further, but that will continue to be an ugly area for a while.
Yep. And I think my final prediction is you just stole one of mine, so I'm coming up with another one. My big prediction, my final prediction is we are going to see proven categorically that gas prices right now are not going to stop people from buying electric cars. We're going to see gas prices drop further, and we're going to see mass media trying to use that as an excuse to demonstrate why Tesla's prices are falling and these other companies are not selling as many plug-in cars as they might like. But I believe that we are going to have a shale bust in the US this year, and that's going to dramatically put prices up. And by the end of next year, people are going to be baying for plugins. What's your final one?
That would be nice.
What's your final one?
My final one is that I think we're going to see compliance cars, the subject of compliance cars, and their detrimental effects start to increase in terms of the conversation and how to address them, and see them get less support than they have historically gotten.
That's going to be an interesting one.
For real, quote, real programs.
And do you think that's going to come from CARB, or do you think that's going to come from someone else?
I think it's going to come through a variety of sources. CARB may or may not be a part of it, but I think some of them will be agency voices, if not California agencies, and certainly some of the others who would love to see more EVs, but are watching California be such the center of gravity that they feel like they're losing out. But it will also come from other stakeholders. Obviously not likely a lot of auto companies, although there are a couple that I could absolutely see getting on that bandwagon. But yeah, as a topic, it is the number one thing standing in our way. Okay. And it can continue.
These are going to be interesting topics. We will come back to them next year. By which point, hopefully, I will be in Portland, Oregon. I'm very excited. This might be the last end-of-year show I do in the UK.
Very cool.
This is very exciting. We've been doing visa application paperwork all day, and it's very long and boring and horrible. Chelsea, thank you so much for joining us this year. You've been on multiple times. Thank you again for joining us. Thank you for finally seeing us with video. I can wave at you and you can wave back. This is such an amazing experience. For those who don't know, this is the first show we've done where we've actually been able to send video back to our guests so they'll be able to see what's going on. I suspect actually that might have been what threw Chris off, because I was sending video his way and his connection obviously couldn't work, and when we had the audio only it was fine. But thank you very much to everyone for joining us today. Thank you to all our guests this year. Thank you to everyone who supported the show, told everyone about us, supported us by buying stuff from the shop, turned up, phoned us, emailed us, tweeted at us. All of those wonderful things. Thank you for everyone who's stayed with us through thick and thin. And here's to better, more awesome things in 2015. Thanks for joining us. Have a fantastic new year if you are celebrating. And folks, until next time, don't forget to plug in. See you soon. Take care. Bye.